Welcome back. The free speech streaming platform Rumble is taking on Canada in a legal slugfest that may leave the neighbor to our north in quite the sweating state of nannydom. According to the Post-Millennial, Rumble teamed up with Rebel News to sue the Canadian government, specifically dealing with the Crown Corporation, Canada Lands Company, and some of its top brass in that particular litigation. Why is this happening? Because the government entities tried to kneecap a Donald Trump Jr. event in Downsview Park, slapping more than $37,000 on the security bill out of nowhere. Seems to us to be pure political spite. The lawsuit filed in Ontario Superior Court demands that cash back, plus a cool $250,000 in punitive damages for stomping on charter rights. Rumble CEO Chris Pavlovski, who is originally Canadian, and Rebel's Ezra Levant are swinging back hard, saying this is more than just a squabble about money. It's about stopping Canada's censorship industrial circus from crossing the border. The country that gave us maple syrup, the Mounties, and politeness is now serving up Dudley Do-Right speech Gestapo. Joining us now is the author of the Amazon bestseller Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, our friend Tim Murtaugh. Tim, bring us up to date on what is going on in this scuffle between Rumble and Canada.
So Rumble and an outfit, a news outlet called Rebel News, and their leader, Ezra Levant, have sued the government of Canada and a member of Parliament of Canada, a woman named Yara Sachs, and also some other government officials. This all stems from a couple of events from a year ago in Toronto, two events, one called Rumble Live and the other one called Rebel News Live. And these also featured appearances and speeches by Donald Trump Jr., so it was a large-scale event. And so the landlord of the venue is a government agency where this was going to go off, where these two events were going off. And this member of parliament and the venue got together and they decided to charge exorbitant security costs in an attempt to try to scuttle these events and have the events canceled. And we know about internal communications that went on inside that said they knew that there was no lawful way that they could prevent these events from happening. They also had information from the local police that the local police had no reason to believe that there was ever going to be any sort of security concerns. And indeed, the events went off without a hitch and there were no incidents. This was clearly viewpoint discrimination. In fact, in these internal communications, we know that they were worried about an undesirable crowd. And by that, we believe they meant, people who were, perhaps conservatives, And also we know that this member of parliament had posted on X that she didn't like Rebel News in particular because they had been in regular communication with her opponent in the upcoming election. She actually posted on X about this. This is straight up government attempt to try to stifle the freedom of speech. That's exactly what's going on here. And Rumble and Rebel News are seeking damages in the exorbitant costs of $37,000 for security, which, by the way, was more than the cost of putting on the events themselves, the security that they tacked on, plus $250,000 in punitive damages and legal costs. Yeah. And so that has just been filed, and that'll be moving forward in Canadian court.
I think the East German Stasi would be proud of some of these Canadian tactics, but we probably wouldn't be. Now, I'm familiar with how this jurisprudence plays out in the United States. We don't allow something called the heckler's veto, where if people say they are aggrieved by a speech, that then the government is able to come in and say, well, now there's a different overlay of cost or permission structure, and we have the First Amendment, which of course doesn't exist in Canada, but they do have a Charter of Rights. And so what is kind of the corollary in Canada that we should look to vindicate people's ability to come to a Donald Trump Jr. speech without that event being hindered with these unfair costs?
Well, I think a case like this would be a really strong blow in favor of free expression. Canadians do have the right to free expression. And this is clearly a government official and government agencies in Canada trying to restrict people's speech before the fact. And you simply can't do that. They knew they were in communication privately. They knew there was no lawful way for them to prevent these events from happening. They knew they had no actual reasons to try to prevent the events from happening, only that they disagreed with the participants politically. And that's it. And so I think a case like this is something that can serve as a landmark case. I think this is a really, really very important case for Canadian law to set precedent that you can't do that. But also, Rumble is on the front lines of fighting for freedom of speech, not just in Canada and the United States, but also in Brazil. I think we've talked about this before. They're in court fighting against this rogue judge, the Supreme Court justice from Brazil, who's trying to shut down speech that he doesn't like anywhere. Rumble is not permitted to operate inside the country of Russia because they refuse to give in to Russian demands for certain censorship, pulling down certain channels. YouTube, for example, is allowed to operate in Russia, so it begs the question: what did YouTube agree to be allowed to operate inside the confines of a country like Russia? So I think Rumble has to be looked at as really the vanguard on the fight for free speech here, and I think a case like this that is filed with Rumble and Rebel News against a member of Parliament of Canada and also the Canadian government can serve as sort of a marker saying, you can't do this. You can't shut down speech just because you don't like either the people involved or what they have to say. You just can't do that.
You stated it brilliantly. Rumble is in all the fights that matter about control over information and speech and the way they're vertically integrating technology. It's terrific. There is another fight that matters, and I wanted to ask you about it, Tim. There's the Biden pill penalty that has really raised its head in some of these negotiations over the federal budget reconciliation legislation. What is the Biden pill penalty, and how can Congress fix it?
Well, you know that the government can pass legislation that either coerces people to do something or it discourages certain behavior. A lot of times government passes things that try to steer people into behaving certain ways. The Biden pill penalty is something that was inserted into the poorly named Inflation Reduction Act in 2021. And what it does is it treats different categories of drugs differently. It sets the bar for when government price controls kick in later for a certain kind of medicines, what are called large molecule medicines, the things like IVs, things that you usually have to go to the hospital to get. And the price controls kick in far sooner for things that are in pill form, so-called small molecule medicines. And what that means is that research dollars and investments are flowing away from pill medicines. In fact, since this was introduced in 2021, research dollars for pills, this is the most convenient, the most affordable, and the most effective way that most people get their needed medicines. 70% of the research dollars have just disappeared from pill medicines, and they've gone to other areas, either to these large molecule medicines or to somewhere else entirely, like perhaps to AI or to oil or other industries. The 70% of the research dollars are gone. What that means is research is no longer occurring to invent new medicines or find new applications for existing medicines. And the University of Chicago, the pretty august institution there, has done a study on this, and they have found that this Biden pill penalty has prevented the discovery of 188 cures or applications for new medicines or new medicines to be invented entirely. 188 medicines or uses for medicine not invented. And also, as a corollary to that, 116 million life years lost off the life expectancies of Americans who are living today. It's really pretty astounding. That's the Biden pill penalty, and it's preventing discoveries in places like Alzheimer's or research, Alzheimer's treatments or mental health treatments or cancer drugs. Joe Biden says, I wanted to cure cancer. He made it more unlikely that cancer could be cured because he's stopping the research by the Biden pill penalty. So yes, Congress can fix this in the budget reconciliation that's coming up, or with separate legislation called the EPIC Act, but most likely in budget reconciliation. I mean, you know how government can control things and maybe an unintended or unintended consequences. The Biden pill penalty, it's really destroying research and helping people get new medicines that they might desperately need.
Tim Murtaugh, swing hard in case you hit it. Thanks so much for coming on the program and sharing us that perspective and keeping us up to date.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.